Leah Thomas suddenly switching your gender, competing against women is not fair. I am open to Leah Thomas.
You're going to say it's not fair.
Don't ask me a question and then cut me off when I give you the answer. It's just obnoxious. It really is.
Candace Owens walked into a room full of woke college students, and by the time she left, let's just say things weren't looking good for their argument. It all went down at a live event where Candace tackled one of the most controversial issues of our time: transgender athletes competing in women's sports. She didn't just speak, she dismantled the entire woke narrative with facts that left the room in stunned silence. If biology doesn't care about your feelings, how can fairness in sports?
Think that a man taking down a woman on a map should warrant a call to the police.
This all caught fire after a boy in Texas won the state championship in a girls' wrestling division. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see why that would ruffle some feathers. I mean, think about it. You've got a biological male competing against females. And surprise, surprise, he dominated the match.
A man as a woman to having a man take you down on a mat, that is totally fine for me. But what is unacceptable is that we have these divisions. This is for women, this is for men, and you have people that are allowing men to compete in these women's divisions and to obviously dominate, because going back to biology, men, of course, are stronger than women. They are always going to be stronger. And
Candace Owens had something to say about this. And honestly, she didn't hold back. Her take? A man taking down a woman in sports should be illegal. End of story. And let's be real. Does she have a point? I think most people with a brain can see the issue here. It's like throwing Hulk into a fight with Black Widow. Sure, she's tough. But come on, it's not a fair fight. Biological males tend to have physical advantages in terms of strength, speed, and endurance. And this isn't something you can just wish away because it doesn't fit into today's woke narrative. When you start blurring the lines between men's and women's sports, you're bound to upset people who believe in fair competition.
Completely unacceptable, and it's fraudulent, and the people...
Exactly, going from second to first does not happen naturally. Yeah.
Candace's stance comes from a place of common sense. You can't just decide biology doesn't matter because it's inconvenient. And as we saw with this Texas case, it can lead to some pretty bizarre results in the name of inclusivity. Can you blame people for being frustrated? It's almost like we've lost our collective grip on reality just to avoid offending anyone.
I think of Native American tribes talking about their spirits. I know that they used to smoke a lot. They used to do drugs. They also were cannibals who used to eat people. So I don't know if we should be taking our cues from cannibals.
Now, this part of the debate was both confusing and, honestly, a bit hilarious. A student tried to bring up the two-spirit concept from Native American cultures, arguing that transgender people have been around for centuries, long before today's media started talking about it. Now, the term two-spirit is supposed to refer to individuals who embody both masculine and feminine qualities, something the student equates with modern transgender identity.
That some Native American tribes have people that would be considered trans today, something that we can't fact check because they're dead.
But Candace Owens wasn't buying it. Her response? Classic. So they were chopping off genitals back then too? Give me a break. Cue the laughter. She then doubled down, comparing this to taking advice from cannibals because, well, Native American tribes were also known to practice cannibalism. Her point was clear. Just because something happened in history doesn't mean it should be used as a model for modern society.
It's historical knowledge that there were trans Native Americans.
Yes.
I really don't think that's historical knowledge. But here's what I'll answer. I don't think that there were trans Native Americans.
I mean, can you blame the audience for cracking up? The idea that this ancient cultural concept of two-spirit people should justify modern gender fluidity just doesn't add up for most people. It felt like the student was grasping at straws, trying to make a historical argument out of something that Candace just saw as a rebranding of spiritual beliefs for a woke agenda. And honestly, watching her shut down the argument with sarcasm and wit was a chef's kiss.
Native Americans were also cannibals. Did you know that fact? Did you educate yourself on the fact?
All Native Americans were cannibals?
Should we just assume that it's natural for us to be eating humans because Native Americans were cannibals?
Candace made it crystal clear that she thinks the explosion of transgender identity is a modern phenomenon, thanks largely to media influence. Her argument? Back when she was in high school, there weren't any transgender people. Fast forward to today, and suddenly it feels like transgender identity is everywhere. Coincidence? She doesn't think so.
I do believe in God, yes.
So
That doesn't make me believe in trans people. That doesn't make me believe that you can switch your parts. I don't believe they were performing surgeries.
Her point here is pretty straightforward. She's not saying people didn't feel different back in the day, but the fact that we've gone from barely discussing transgender identity to it being front and center in every aspect of life, from schools to sports, is a media-fueled trend. And look, whether you agree with her or not, it's hard to deny the power media has to shape cultural norms. These days, it feels like you can't turn on the TV or open Twitter without seeing some new take on gender identity. It's like Hollywood, and the media suddenly decided this is the hill they're going to die on. One of the hottest talking points Candace Owens addresses head-on is the case of Leah Thomas, the swimmer who made headlines by competing in women's events after transitioning from competing as a man. This situation has sparked heated debates across the country, and Candace has no issue saying exactly what's on her mind. According to her, the problem here is pretty straightforward. Men will always be stronger and faster. Biology doesn't care about feelings. And when you think about it, can anyone argue with that?
I am open to Leah Thomas and every other trans person having their own category at the Olympics and allowing them to compete. That is absolutely fine. Having their own category at high school universities, at high schools, at universities, everywhere across the country, and being able to compete.
It's as if we're living in a world where common sense has taken a vacation. We're talking about someone who wasn't exactly dominating in men's competitions, but suddenly becomes a star when competing against women. It's not hard to connect the dots. This isn't about some magical transformation or a heartwarming story of living your truth. It's about biology, plain and simple. Men, on average, have greater muscle mass, stronger bone density, and better endurance than women, especially in competitive sports. Those are hard facts, and no amount of feeling is going to change that.
I am not open to our biological men competing against women. If you want evidence that biological men will always defeat women, look no further than the actual Olympics and look at the time differences as it is when men are competing in a sprint versus women competing in a sprint.
Candace breaks it down in a way that's hard to refute. It's like putting Captain America into a regular human race. There's no contest, and we all know how that's going to end. Sure, people can have their journeys and beliefs about gender, but when it comes to athletic competition, you can't just throw biology out the window and expect fair results. Letting biological males compete against women creates an obvious imbalance, and anyone pretending not to see it is either ignoring reality or trying hard to appease today's woke culture.
Are competing in a throw versus when women are competing in a throw. If you don't want to acknowledge biological reality, I want you to lead the trans Olympics. I want you to be the person that establishes.
She uses Leah Thomas as the perfect example of what happens when we let ideology overrule fairness. Thomas went from being a middle-of-the-pack swimmer when competing with men to absolutely dominating women's events after transitioning. And no, it's not because Thomas suddenly got faster. It's because of the undeniable biological advantages that come from being born male. So when Candace says, men will always be stronger and faster, she's pointing to something that's backed by science, not just personal opinion.
I love that your solution is separate but equal.
What? So we already have what? Your solution is separate but equal? What are you talking about? We already have men and women divisions, so is that separate but equal?
Now, what does Candace propose as a solution? It's simple, and it makes a lot of sense. Let's just have a trans division. Problem solved. Why not, right? That way, transgender athletes can compete in a space that's fair for everyone, and we avoid this whole mess of men competing against women. But, of course, not everyone is on board with this idea. At one event, a student tried to counter her point with the classic separate but equal argument, implying that creating a trans division would be discriminatory. The idea that creating a separate trans division is somehow exclusionary or unjust feels like a stretch. It's not about excluding transgender athletes. It's about making sure everyone competes on a level playing field. Imagine if we stopped having weight classes in boxing. Would it be fair to have a heavyweight fighter in the ring with a lightweight? Of course not. So why should we act like the same logic doesn't apply when it comes to men's and women's sports? Candace's argument cuts right through the noise, and frankly, it's hard to disagree when you break it down like that. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.